Emily Carter appeared to have everything a young woman of 28 could hope for. She lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood just outside of Denver, Colorado. In a small but stylish home she had decorated herself. The walls were adorned with minimalist art and shelves filled with plants, each one meticulously chosen to create a sense of calm. Her job as a digital marketing specialist at a growing agency provided her with financial stability, and her Instagram feed told the story of a vibrant, happy life. Brunches with friends, hiking trips in the Rockies, and snapshots of her dog, Max. But the truth behind the curated facade was far more complicated. For months, Emily had been grappling with a gnawing sense of stagnation. Each morning, she woke to the sound of her alarm and lay in bed for an extra 15 minutes, staring at the ceiling, dreading the day ahead. The simple act of getting up felt monumental. Her morning routine, brewing the same coffee, scrolling aimlessly through her phone, and mentally preparing for another day of unfulfilling work, left her feeling more drained than energized. By the time Emily logged onto her computer at 9 a.m., her mental state was already teetering. Tasks that used to excite her now felt mechanical. Drafting reports and running ad campaigns no longer sparked any creativity or joy. Even when her work received praise, Emily felt detached, as though the recognition was being given to someone else entirely. Emily's friends and colleagues noticed the shift, but their casual questions, "Are you okay?" or "You seem a little off today," only deepened her sense of isolation. She couldn't explain what was wrong. How could she, when even she didn't fully understand it? On paper, her life was fine. She wasn't facing a major crisis or external obstacle. Yet internally, Emily felt like she was running in place, trapped in a cycle she couldn't break. The worst moments came at night. After another day of meaningless tasks, she would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering, is this it? The fear of wasting her potential, of waking up 10 years later to find nothing had changed, was suffocating. Emily began avoiding social events, turning down invitations with the excuse that she was too busy. In reality, she couldn't bear the thought of small talk or pretending to be happy. Her world was shrinking, and she felt powerless to stop it. Emily's growing dissatisfaction began to bleed into other areas of her life. She noticed herself becoming irritable over minor inconveniences, snapping at friends and family for no reason. She stopped walking Max at the park, opting instead to let him out in the backyard, where he whimpered at the lack of attention. Her once healthy habits, like cooking balanced meals and practicing yoga, were replaced with takeout dinners and endless Netflix marathons. The most haunting thought of all was the idea that this feeling might never go away. Emily imagined herself at 40, still stuck in the same job, living in the same house, and harboring the same unshakable emptiness. Her future looked like a mirror image of her present, with only the ticking clock as proof that time had passed. This vision was enough to make her panic, yet every attempt to fix things, whether it was buying a new planner, setting ambitious goals, or reading self-help books, ended in the same place, nowhere. She felt as though every spark of motivation was extinguished before it could even catch fire. It wasn't until a chance conversation with her college friend Sarah that Emily heard about Dr. Vincent Vale. Over dinner one evening, Sarah shared how she had recently worked with a therapist who specialized in helping people who felt stuck in life. Sarah described Dr. Vale as someone who combined traditional talk therapy with practical neuroscience-backed strategies to help his clients reclaim their sense of purpose. "I'm telling you, Em," Sarah said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial tone. "He's a game changer. I was in a really dark place when I found him, and now I actually feel like I'm in control of my life again." Reluctantly, and mostly out of desperation, Emily booked an appointment. She didn't fully believe it would work, but something about Sarah's conviction made her curious. When she arrived at Dr. Vale's office, she was struck by how different it felt from a typical therapist's office. The lighting was soft and natural, with large windows overlooking a small garden. The furniture was modern yet inviting. and the faint aroma of lavender lingered in the air. Dr. Vale greeted her with a warm smile and a calm energy that immediately put her at ease. "Emily," he said, shaking her hand, "I'm so glad you're here. Let's figure this out together." Emily didn't know it yet, but this was the start of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself. With Dr. Vale's guidance, she would begin to uncover the patterns that were keeping her trapped, confront her deepest fears, and learn that the path to motivation wasn't about waiting for inspiration, but about taking small, consistent steps every day. For the first time in years, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, change was possible. Emily's first session with Dr. Vincent Vale was a mixture of apprehension and cautious hope. As she stepped into his office, she noticed the serene ambiance, walls painted in soothing earth tones, framed quotes about resilience and growth, and a corner table holding a teapot and neatly stacked cups. A large window flooded the room with natural light, and soft instrumental music played faintly in the background. It felt less like a clinical setting and more like a haven, a place designed to make people feel safe. When Dr. Vale entered, he exuded a calm confidence. Dressed in a tailored blazer and with kind eyes that seemed to see right through her practiced composure, he offered a warm handshake. "Emily," he said, his tone steady yet welcoming, "you've already taken the first step just by showing up here today. Let's talk about where you are and where you'd like to be." Emily felt her guard start to lower. She had expected to feel judged or lectured, but Dr. Vale's demeanor was different. He listened intently, never interrupting as she explained her struggles. She found herself sharing more than she had planned, describing the monotony of her days, the emptiness she felt despite her accomplishments, and her deep fear that nothing would ever change. "Sometimes," Dr. Vale said gently, "it's not about fixing everything at once. It's about understanding why we feel stuck and starting with one small change at a time. We'll get to the root of this together." Over the next few sessions, Dr. Vale guided Emily through a process of uncovering the behaviors and thought patterns that were keeping her trapped. He asked probing questions that made her pause and reflect, often challenging her assumptions about herself. One exercise stood out in particular. Dr. Vale asked her to track how she spent her time for a week and to note how each activity made her feel. When they reviewed the log together, Emily noticed a pattern she hadn't been fully aware of. She spent hours scrolling through social media, comparing herself to others, and feeling increasingly inadequate. She also avoided activities that required effort or risk, preferring the comfort of predictable routines, even if they were unfulfilling. "Your brain is wired to seek comfort and avoid pain," Dr. Vale explained. "But comfort zones, while safe, can also become cages. The good news is that you can train your mind to step out of that cage, one small action at a time." Another breakthrough came when they delved into the emotional roots of her stagnation. Emily realized that much of her fear of change stemmed from a deeper fear of failure. As a child, she had been praised for being the responsible one, the one who always got things right. That pressure had followed her into adulthood, leaving her paralyzed by the thought of making a mistake. Dr. Vale introduced her to the concept of progress over perfection. He encouraged her to reframe failure as a necessary step in the process of growth, rather than something to be avoided at all costs. "What if," he asked, "the point isn't to get it right the first time, but to learn and adjust as you go?" The first few weeks of therapy weren't easy. Emily often felt frustrated, doubting whether the small steps Dr. Vale suggested, like setting aside 10 minutes a day for something she enjoyed, could really make a difference. She found herself resisting some of the exercises, dismissing them as too simple or insignificant. "Emily," Dr. Vale said during one session, "change doesn't have to be monumental to be meaningful. The small things add up. Think of it as planting seeds. They won't grow overnight, but with care and consistency they will." Reluctantly, she decided to trust the process. She began by walking Max at the park again, something she hadn't done in months. At first, it felt like a chore, but over time, she started to notice small moments of joy. The crisp morning air, the way Max's tail wagged enthusiastically, the brief but warm interactions with other dog owners. One day, during a session, Dr. Vale asked her to visualize what her ideal day would look like if she felt truly motivated. As she described it, a morning spent journaling, an afternoon exploring creative projects, an evening connecting with loved ones, she realized something profound. The gap between her current life and her ideal life wasn't as wide as she had thought. It was filled with small, actionable steps that she could start taking immediately. This realization was a turning point. Emily began to see her journey not as an insurmountable mountain, but as a series of manageable hills. With Dr. Vale's support, she identified 3 areas to focus on: reconnecting with her creativity, building meaningful relationships, and prioritizing self-care. As Emily started implementing these small changes, she noticed subtle shifts in her mood and energy. She took up painting again, not worrying about whether the final product was good, but simply enjoying the process. She reached out to friends she had distanced herself from and scheduled coffee dates. She even started practicing mindfulness, setting aside a few minutes each day to breathe and reflect. For the first time in years, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. The fog that had clouded her mind was beginning to lift, and she realized that motivation wasn't something she had to wait for, it was something she could create. Emily's progress was steady, but fragile. Small changes had begun to brighten her days, and she felt a sense of control she hadn't experienced in years. Yet, as Dr. Vale often reminded her, true transformation required facing and overcoming her biggest fears. That moment came unexpectedly when her manager at work, Julia, approached her with a daunting request. "Emily, we've been impressed with your work on the recent campaigns," Julia said during a casual one-on-one meeting. "We'd like you to present your strategies to the executive team next week. It's a big opportunity for you." Emily's stomach dropped. The idea of standing in front of a room full of executives being scrutinized and judged filled her with dread. Her immediate instinct was to decline. "Oh, I'm not sure I'm the best person for this," she began, her voice shaky. Julia smiled encouragingly. "I believe you are, Emily. Take the weekend to think about it." That evening, Emily vented her fears to Dr. Vale during an emergency session. "I can't do it," she said, pacing his office. "What if I freeze? What if I say something stupid? Everyone will know I'm a fraud." Dr. Vale listened intently before responding. "Emily, this fear you're feeling is the same fear that's kept you stuck for so long. It's not about the presentation. It's about the story you've been telling yourself, that you're not good enough, that you'll fail if you try something outside your comfort zone." Dr. Vale guided Emily through a strategy to tackle her anxiety in manageable steps. First, they reframed the presentation as an opportunity to share her expertise, not to prove her worth. "You're not there to be perfect," he reminded her. "You're there to communicate what you know and to learn from the experience." Next, they broke the task into smaller, less intimidating parts. Emily spent an hour each day preparing her content, practicing in front of a mirror, and recording herself to identify areas for improvement. Dr. Vale also suggested she use visualization techniques, imagining herself confidently presenting and receiving positive feedback. Finally, they discussed how to reframe failure. "Even if something goes wrong," Dr. Vale said, "it's not the end of the world. Mistakes are part of growth. What matters is that you're showing up and trying." The morning of the presentation arrived, and Emily felt a familiar sense of panic bubbling up. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart raced as she reviewed her notes one last time. She thought about calling in sick, but a memory of one of Dr. Vale's earlier sessions stopped her. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. As she entered the conference room, Emily focused on her breathing, grounding herself as Dr. Vale had taught her. The executives greeted her warmly, and Julia gave her an encouraging nod. She began her presentation hesitantly, her voice quivering slightly. But as she moved through her slides, something shifted. She found her rhythm, and her confidence grew with each passing minute. She noticed nods of approval from the executives, and even caught herself smiling. By the end of the presentation, she felt a wave of relief and pride. The executives thanked her for her. That evening, Emily reflected on the experience. For so long, she had believed that fear was a sign to retreat, a warning to stay within her comfort zone. But this time, she had pushed through it, and the world hadn't fallen apart. In fact, it had opened up new possibilities. The next day, she received an email from one of the executives asking her to lead a similar presentation for a broader team. For the first time, Emily didn't feel overwhelmed by the request. Instead, she saw it as a chance to build on her newfound confidence. During her next session with Dr. Vale, Emily shared her success and the lessons she had learned. It wasn't just about the presentation, she said. It was about proving to myself that I can handle challenges, even when they scare me. Dr. Vale smiled. That's the power of facing your fears head-on. Each time you do, you're rewiring your brain to see challenges not as threats, but as opportunities. And with every step, you're building the momentum to keep moving forward. They discussed how Emily could continue applying these principles in other areas of her life. She committed to setting small, achievable goals each week, whether it was reconnecting with an old friend, trying a new hobby, or speaking up more in meetings. The presentation became a defining moment in Emily's journey. It wasn't the absence of fear that marked her transformation, but her ability to navigate it with resilience and courage. She began to see herself in a new light, not as someone trapped by her circumstances, but as someone capable of shaping her future, one step at a time. The weeks following Emily's breakthrough at work were marked by a noticeable shift, not just in her external circumstances, but in her internal narrative. Where she once saw obstacles, she now saw opportunities. The small, incremental changes she had started making earlier in her journey now felt like natural parts of her routine. Emily began her days with purpose, setting aside time each morning for activities that energized her. Sometimes this meant journaling her thoughts. Other times it was taking Max for a brisk walk in the park, enjoying the crisp Colorado air. She felt a connection to her life that had been absent for so long. Her relationships also began to thrive. She reconnected with friends she had drifted away from and was honest with them about the struggles she had been facing. To her surprise, they didn't judge her. Instead, they supported her and shared their own stories of feeling stuck at times. These conversations deepened her bonds and reminded her that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. At work, Emily's confidence continued to grow. She volunteered for projects that once would have intimidated her and even began mentoring a junior colleague. Her manager, Julia, noticed the change and remarked during a team meeting, "Emily, your leadership on recent campaigns has been incredible. You're setting a great example for the rest of the team." During one of their final sessions, Dr. Vale and Emily revisited the goal she had set when she first walked into his office. "How does it feel to look back at where you started?" he asked. Emily smiled, a mixture of pride and disbelief in her expression. "Honestly, it feels like I'm a completely different person. But at the same time, I realized that everything I needed was already inside me. I just needed to stop doubting myself and start taking those small steps forward." Dr. Vale nodded. "That's the beauty of transformation. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about rediscovering the strength and potential that's always been there. You took ownership of your life, Emily, and that's something no one can take away from you." As Emily left his office that day, Dr. Vale sat back in his chair, reflecting on her journey. To him, Emily's story was a powerful reminder of a universal truth, that the path to motivation and fulfillment is rarely linear. It's a process of small, consistent efforts, coupled with the courage to face fears and embrace imperfections. In a message to his audience, Dr. Vale later shared this reflection. "Emily's journey teaches us that being stuck isn't a permanent state. It's a signal. It's a sign that something in our lives needs attention, a call to take even the smallest step toward change. The trick isn't waiting for motivation to strike. It's creating momentum through action, no matter how small. To those listening to Emily's story, Dr. Vale posed a question. What's one area in your life where you feel stuck? And what's one small action you can take today to move forward, even just a little? Remember, every big change starts with a single step. He encouraged viewers to reflect on their own lives, to identify the patterns or fears holding them back, and to challenge themselves to break free. A transformation isn't about perfection. It's about progress, he emphasized. Though her formal therapy sessions with Dr. Vale had come to an end, Emily's journey of growth was far from over. She continued to set new goals for herself, not out of a sense of obligation, but from a genuine excitement about what she could achieve. She signed up for an evening art class, rediscovering her love for painting, and began exploring leadership opportunities at work. Perhaps most importantly, Emily developed a deeper relationship with herself. She learned to celebrate her wins, no matter how small, and to treat setbacks not as failures, but as lessons. Her inner critic, once so loud and relentless, had quieted, replaced by a voice of self-compassion and encouragement. Dr. Vale concluded his reflection with a final thought. Emily's story is unique, but the principles of her transformation apply to us all. Life is full of seasons, some filled with growth, others with stagnation. But no matter where you are, you have the power to take charge of your journey. It starts with a choice, a commitment to yourself, and the belief that even the smallest step can lead to extraordinary change.